Hi, I'm G, this is my art channel, and a while back one of my subscribers suggested I did a drawing of a flower using a calligraphy pen. So when a friend of mine actually gave me her old calligraphy pens that she never used, I thought this is the chance to do that. So here I am using some Rotring Calligraph pens, and this is a 1.5 nib. So after choosing an Aeonium, I drew it out in pencil, and then what you can see me doing now is outlining using the calligraphy pen. So I'm working from left to right and also trying to go from top to bottom so that I don't end up smudging the ink lines that I've just done with the calligraphy pen. And I'm drawing this on a piece of 250 GSM Bristol Board smooth white paper. And with these close-ups, you can see what I'm trying to do with the calligraphy pen is vary the line widths of what I'm drawing here. So I'm trying to go for thin lines and thick lines from just the one nib. And of course, the way you twist and angle the pen should allow you to get thin and thick lines. Just like if you were actually doing calligraphy lettering, you get those really delicate fine lines, and then you get some bolder, thicker lines as well to go with it. And even though this is what I was trying for, I didn't quite manage it because I wanted the thicker, bolder lines to be on the side away from the light source, like the shadowed edge. There you can see I'm diagonally showing you where the light is coming from. But I ended up putting a lot of those thick lines on the sides where the actual light was coming from. Not quite what I wanted. Anyway, you can see a close-up here, and I'm trying to use the calligraphy nib to achieve a sort of hatched or hatching effect with my ink lines to suggest tone. So I'm doing an initial kind of light, one layer of lines, and then I'm going back over it and, doubling up those lines where I need those shadows to be a little bit stronger and a little bit bolder. Now, I'm usually used to using a Pentel brush pen, so an ink brush pen, and even though you can get some very, very fine lines out of that, I found that the lines that I was getting out of the italic pen here, this calligraphy pen, were way thinner than anything I could get out of a brush pen. And there was a tremendous sense of satisfaction when I was able to use a calligraphy pen to get this set of beautiful, parallel, thin, hatched lines all next to each other to lay down that first kind of like area of light grey tone. It was so satisfying. And then to add those second and third areas of tone using the pen to make it a little bit darker, a sort of mid-grey, and then a dark grey, and then a black, was really, really easy to do. And of course, if I needed to do any filled areas of like solid black, I could just turn the nib on its side, use it on its like thickest setting of the nib, and do a really quick, good chunky fill of black color where I needed to. So it was really, really good, and it was a really effective way of getting a range of tone from this one pen. The only little drawback that I found with it was that if I didn't use the pen at just the right angle to kind of like, flick those strokes outwards, 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 if I got the angle a little bit wrong, then it would sort of not tear the paper, but it would kind of get snagged a little bit in the paper. So here's a nice big close-up where you can see my first pass of lines, then a second layer of lines, and then a third layer of lines also to build up that tone. And you can also see how I'm differing the strokes and the angle of those strokes. So, I've got some going diagonally upwards and some sort of cutting across into them. And that was really important because that's the way that some of the lines and the shape of the petal seem to be growing out from the center. So, using the lines in that way, I was able to achieve that kind of look of different kind of folds within the petal. You should also be able to see that I'm using a piece of rough paper underneath my hand every time I'm doing the ink strokes and the ink lines here. And that's because, especially important when you're using inks, I find, is that obviously your hand has got kind of natural oils or greases or whatever, and some of those marks can mark the paper, and then when you're putting ink over it later, it can kind of skip across that surface, and it completely, can ruin an area of tone or an area of lines that you're trying to do. So I always kind of try and wash my hands before I'm going to do a piece of work, and also as much as possible rest my hand on a piece of paper to make sure that some of those natural oils don't go onto the surface of the smooth paper. Here you can see also, in order to get the strokes right, I've turned the piece of paper, the drawing, upside down so I can flick those strokes from the center outwards a lot more easily. If I kept the paper as it was and tried to flick those strokes, it would be really, really difficult for my hand to get the right angle, and the strokes would look really, really different. So turning the paper upside down allows me to flick the strokes in exactly the same way across the whole picture, and it gives the lines and it gives the technique a bit more uniformity rather than one patch looking like I've done it a little bit differently. You might also be looking at this and thinking, oh, look at those massive big leaves and he's trying to get all of that hatching, even all the way across. Well, yeah, if I think about it that way, it is quite difficult and quite daunting. But the major thing you should have noticed is that I tackle each petal, each leaf, half and half. So, I'll do a half to a sort of center line, if you will. And then once I've done that half, I then work on the other half. And not only does that help me and make it easy for me to break up the actual petal and do it, one bit at a time, but it also emphasizes the kind of center line that most petals have, that crease, that fold in the center. As it's grown out from the center and then it's unfurled and uncurled, then you do get that natural kind of crease in the very center of each of the petals. So I find that, inking them in that way, a half at a time, just emphasizes that natural fold in the center and also makes it easier for me to ink it. Notice how I've turned the piece of paper back the right way around now, and I'm working on it, as you would say, normally, because of course a lot of my strokes here on the right hand petals are flicking outwards from the center at the left towards the outer edge of the petal on the right, so flicking from left to right, left to right. So having the piece of paper this way just makes sense, and again keeps all of those strokes even and in the same kind of style all the way around the entire flower. You can see me just going in there and darkening some of those bits in the center, because I didn't think as though the contrast there was quite strong enough, so I wanted to get in there and I wanted to just add an extra layer of tone there to make some of those bits a little bit darker. Here you might have noticed that I've drawn some pencil lines on the leaf. First of all, just some simple single lines, and that's to help me see where the folds and the creases are in this particular leaf, this petal, and that helps me then tackle a little bit at a time and get the kind of creases and the folds looking just right, so that I can add just the right amount of lines and the tone to show it and give it a more of a kind of a 3D feel. Those simple little pencil lines really help me break this down and do it a little bit at a time, so it really makes it easier for me to approach this and doesn't make it so daunting. And of course, because they're in pencil, I can rub those out afterwards and they're not going to leave any kind of a mark. And I will use any little technique like that, any simple technique, to try and make this a little bit easier so I can handle it a bit more kind of bite size. And that is the last petal, so that's the finished picture. There it is next to the photo reference that I used. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and like, because it all supports the channel. And let me know what you think of the picture. The only thing I'm worried about at this point, since I really enjoyed it, was whether I should put a background, do the background as well. So let me know in the comments below what you think about that. And if you enjoyed this one, then you might want to watch some of my other ink tutorials. So I'll pop a whole bunch of links to those below.